when they say that, they completely invisibilize Black parents, and they also dramatically overrepresent the number of white parents that are actually uh, wanting their kids to be lied to about race, right? We know that actually majorities of people want more Black history in the schools, but you don't see that enough on uh, in the media, right? And that's why this grassroots activism is so key to counter the AstroTurf organizations like Moms for Liberty that are funded by billionaires and represent themselves as grassroots, but truly are a front for very wealthy people that want our kids to be lied to. And I'm so glad you all are not allowing that to happen. And I'm in the struggle with you, doing what I can primarily to try to get more educators in this struggle. And I wanted to share some reflections with you all on how I come to this work, why it's important to me, and also where we are in the struggle and where we may need to go if we're going to defeat billionaires who are funding a movement to deny our kids the truth. I want to begin by saying that I have a couple summers ago, I began writing a book about the attack on anti-racist education. And as I was beginning that project, my dad made a stunning discovery that really changed the way I see myself in this country, and it forever changed our family. And my dad called to tell me that he had found where our family was enslaved. He finally found documentation of the plantation, the Lenoir plantation in Morgantown, Mississippi. And it was just a stunning revelation for us. And we immediately began planning a trip down there. We wanted to see this history for ourselves. Unfortunately, there was a surge of COVID rates and we had to cancel our trip. And then my dad had a stroke, and again, we had to cancel our trip. And then I got long COVID and we had to cancel the trip again. And my brother has a fear of flying and he wanted to go, but he wasn't sure he was going to be able to make it. But you know what? Last spring, the beginning of the summer, we all just decided it was time. We'd waited too long, and we went down to Mississippi. And we drove to Morgantown, Mississippi, a teeny little town where the Lenoir plantation was located. And we were able to go on the land, and there was a grave there. Only one headstone remained from the gravesite where my ancestors buried each other. And at that gravesite, my dad and brother and I did a ceremony for our ancestors. And part of that ceremony was a letter that I read aloud at the gravesite that was a promise to my ancestors. And this promise to my ancestors is really why I'm doing this work. And so I wanted to start by sharing some about that work with you all and sharing my letter with you. And so that's a photo of my dad, my brother, and I at the gravesite in Morgantown, Mississippi. The name on the headstone, you can see that little chunk. It had fallen off and was barely visible, and all the other headstones had been removed. But it was an incredible moment for our family to be standing right in the fields where they had picked cotton and tobacco, and to be at the gravesite and to be that close. And at the gravesite, I read these words. I said, "Beloved ancestors, many obstacles have been placed in the way of us returning to the land where you were enslaved, abused, and forced to work to enrich the white Lenoir family. The pandemic, a stroke, a fear of flying, and long COVID delayed our journey here. Before that, the education system withheld any knowledge of where you came from, the cruelty you endured, or the creativity and beautiful resistance you contributed to the world. The system of white supremacy used many tactics to deceive us and prevent our family from making this pilgrimage to where you were held captive and denied manumission. Despite the many obstacles and the plots to hide this place from us and deny us knowledge of this land and your existence here, we have found it. Your family has returned to claim you. We have returned to the forced enslaved labor camp that was politely referred to as the Lenoir plantation. We have returned to the place where you no doubt spent endless hours picking cotton and tobacco with the promise of the lash if you slowed down or refused. We have returned to the site of unspeakable horrors, but we have also returned to the place where you all dared to live. A place where you all had the incredible courage to love, despite knowing that falling in love could inflict a terrible pain when your beloved was sold away or worked to death. We are here. We are at the very place where you found ways to guard your humanity from those who thought it was possible to steal. We are here where you sang together, granted forgiveness to a friend who hurt your feelings, dressed the wounds of those who were injured, bounced a baby on your knee, and held those in need of comfort. We are here to experience a truth deeper than any that can be understood intellectually. We are here to make a promise to you, to this land, and to each other. You will not be forgotten. It doesn't matter if they pass laws that make it illegal to speak of you, to teach about you, or to learn about you, because those laws don't govern us. Only truth and love govern us. And so we will pass on the knowledge of this land and your experience here to our posterity and to all who we encounter. We send to you our deepest gratitude for gifting us the will to survive and the spirit of resistance that you have passed to us through your blood and through your stories. With eternal love, Jesse, Jamana, and Gerald. So that is my promise to my ancestors. You know, that acknowledgement of my ancestors, of the land they were stolen from in Africa, the labor that was stolen from them, and then the land that was stolen from the native people on their land and all across the United States, has to be acknowledged. And, you know, I'm from Seattle, and our city is named after a Duwamish chief. And yet the Duwamish people don't have federal recognition, and their treaty was broken, and they still don't have federal recognition. So those are the contradictions that those who don't want our kids to learn about anti-racism, those are the contradictions they want to hide from our youth. But despite that, this the truth is my ancestors were enslaved, and I will refuse to lie to students about what that experience meant. This is my great-grandmother, Laura Lenoir. She was 13 when the Civil War ended, and she married my that's my great-great-grandmother, Laura Lenoir, and she married my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Lenoir, and they had
share the slideshow, because like Slayer slideshow, we can, that, and then
there we go.
Boom.
Yep. And she birthed 19 children, one of which was York Alonzo. And he had the incredible opportunity to go to the first land grant college, Alcorn University, the first Black land grant college that was established during Reconstruction after the Civil War, and became a principal. And, I do this work for my ancestors who had to fight to get any school started, right? And it was actually in the Reconstruction era that Black people built the public school system. There were quote unquote public schools in the North, but they were segregated, right? And in the South, there weren't public schools at all. And it was the hunger for learning and the knowledge that there was no true emancipation without education that started a massive campaign of Black people founding schools. And this really troubled white supremacists because they knew that the mass literacy of Black people would put to lie the sham of white supremacy. And so the Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist organizations began burning down schools. They burnt down over 600 schools in the Reconstruction era. That's how scared they were of Black education. And that's really the legacy and the tradition that the current attack on anti-racist education comes from. And our movement to honor Black education comes from those who rebuilt those schools that were burnt down. Sometimes 2-3 times they had to rebuild the schools after the Klan Night Riders, right?
Just
And
pick up your slides because we're not moving this. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're gonna move.
Yep.
Okay.
So this was the plantation house that was that was there originally, the big house that my ancestors built, and that is no longer standing there, but was in that field that I showed you earlier where we were kneeling by the grave, right? And, today you can see all across the country the bans on anti-racist teaching, on what they call critical race theory, and what they call gender ideology, which is just attacks on BIPOC people, on LGBTQ plus people, are happening in every state. I think every state but Vermont has either proposed a bill to ban anti-racist teaching or teaching about LGBTQ plus identity, or there is school districts that have banned the practice. And it is truly incredible the level of repression that we're seeing in this country about Black history or queer identity is truly off the charts. It's so wild that only The Onion, only a satirical newspaper, can truly capture the absurdity of what we're seeing. Did people see this one? The calendar jumps to March 1st after critical race theory ban prohibits the month of February. It's sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. My own hometown of Seattle has its own version of The Onion. Our newspaper is called The Needling. They had this headline: Florida bans the letters LGBTQ from the alphabet, right? That's how homophobic and transphobic their government is. And it's as absurd as these headlines are, the reality is far worse. I mean, think about it. Florida has official state policy. The official education policy says that slavery was of, quote, personal benefit to the enslaved, right? You got to let that sink in for a second, that's how far we've come from the days during Reconstruction when they were burning down our schools for any teacher that was teaching the truth about enslavement. And now they want to completely erase the terror that was that brutality of enslavement, right? And so I believe that we have to recognize the historical precedents of this attack and understand that we can't allow them to erase our family's history. And this is what the struggle it looks like across the country. People are rising up and fighting back, and it's a beautiful sight. And it's always been part of the Black freedom struggle, and it's really been heartwarming to see the actions on the June 10th through 12th days of action. We had our third national day of action to hashtag Teach Truth this year, and people were pressing back against these neo-McCarthyist policies, right? And I want to talk about what I mean by neo-McCarthyist. This cartoon comes out of the late 40s, early 50s Red Scare that happened, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy from Wisconsin. But, many politicians joined in. And during the Red Scare in the 40s and 50s, anybody who challenged racism, challenged economic inequality, could be labeled a red, a subversive, a communist, and attacked, put on a list, and fired. And this happened to thousands of teachers across the country, right? In New York City alone, 400 educators were fired under suspicion of being subversive or being a communist. And the Red Scare was met with the overlapping Lavender Scare. And this is the exact playbook that they are drawing from with today's attack on anti-racist education, because the Lavender Scare was the attack on LGBTQ plus people. And they fired more people from the federal government during the Lavender Scare in the early 50s than they did even suspected communists. And in Florida, they had the Johns Committee that began as a witch hunt against left-wing or socialists, but it quickly morphed into an attack on LGBTQ plus people, and especially teachers. And any woman who was an educator who was not married came under suspicion, was hauled in front of this committee and grilled, and they ended up firing hundreds of teachers under suspicion that they were lesbian. And you can see that this is exactly what they've brought back with the so-called Stop Woke Act and the Don't Say Gay, Don't Say Trans laws, right? This is the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare all over again. A friend of mine in Wisconsin named Melissa Temple, you may have heard her story. She was an elementary school teacher, and her students were getting ready to put on a school performance. And in this musical that her students were going to do, one of the songs they were going to sing was Rainbow Land by Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton, a pop song, a widely popular song where they sing about rainbows and they sing about treating everyone equally. But they don't even mention queer folks. But that was still too much for the school district. And when my friend Melissa tweeted that the students had the right to sing that song after it was pulled from the program, They fired her. She showed up to work on Monday after she sent that tweet, and there was a police officer waiting for her in the office along with the principal to escort her out. This is how absurd and how intense the attack is. You know, an educator in Iowa that I spoke to recently, he was teaching the book Stamped from the Beginning and teaching kids about the history of racist ideas in the United States. And he came under attack from a state senator who was calling it critical race theory and saying that he was shaming white children. And so he went to a school district and asked, can we teach that slavery was wrong? And he got a Zoom meeting with the superintendent. And thankfully, that Zoom meeting was recorded, so we don't have to speculate. We can see exactly what happened. And he asked her, can we teach that slavery was wrong? And she equivocates and says, well, that's an opinion. Right. And so when I say that I'm going to teach the experience of my family being enslaved, and we aren't going to lie about it, that's what I mean. There are many places across this country where if you teach that reality, your job is at stake. And that's why I am so just amazed by the outpouring of the uprising that's occurring across the country. It doesn't always get reported on, but educators are defying the laws where it tells them they can't teach about structural racism. There are educators in every state teaching about structural racism anyway, because it's true. Because my ancestors were brought here in a slave ship, because Native people were forced into boarding schools, and they're still finding the unmarked graves of kids at the boarding schools. They found hundreds of remains already in the last year of children who died at these boarding schools, right? These are the truths that we have a right to teach about, and that we won't be able to build a truly multiracial democratic society until these truths are known, confronted, and our country is transformed to truly embrace everybody who is a part of it. And these are all images from our amazing day of action across the country, where educators and parents and students joined together and rallied at historic sites. So in Lansing, Michigan, educators there invited the community, and they went to the railroad tracks where Martin Luther King's father was lynched. Where Malcolm X's father was lynched. And they marched from that site to the hospital nearby where he ended up dying. And they brought banned books to the hospital and distributed them to the youth in the hospital. Right? Beautiful event. These are the type of creative resistance that it's going to take to push back and to win. And I'll just end with some quotes from some of the courageous teachers that are refusing to be silenced in the face of these right-wing policies. I love Aaron Chisholm's quote here: "The truth is worth more than the $5,000 fine that the state of Arizona wants to slap on me if I allow my students to become critical thinkers." You can see that despite these laws, we have over 8,000 educators from all over the country who have signed the Zinn Education Project's pledge to teach the truth. And our movement is continuing to grow. So I'm so glad to be here with you all this evening, linking arms in this struggle. And I would love to learn from everybody who's here and see what else we can do to advance the struggle. And I'm happy to take any questions that people may have.
Wow, Jesse, you shared so much. You shared so much about your familial history. Um, like I'm going all the way back to like the Lee Wah plantation, and then your ancestors from the Alcorn State. Like my family went to Alcorn in Jackson State.
Oh,
So
what? No
yeah,
way. Okay.
Alcorn, Jackson
Cool.
State, and also even what's the school? It's another school that's a private school down there that like, yeah, my family's from the Mississippi Delta, so we might even be related. Jesse, we never
Oh,
know.
right on.
We might
You
even
never know.
not even know it.
Really.
But I do want to talk about something in particular about um looking back at your ancestry, and you're like the most accurate depiction of some things come from like the Onion or your like local historical like situation. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, some of this, the truth has to be told through satire sometimes in education. And so I
Mm.
just want you to speak to finding like, oh, that's the most realistic depiction in the news now about Black.
Yep. No, it's true. It's like sometimes the situation that we're living through is so surreal that it requires great art or satire to truly understand the moment we're in. Like I think we need to revisit the book 1984 and see how doublespeak works, and doublethink works, and the way they tried to turn kids in that book against the adults. It really reminded me when I saw a teacher who was turned in by their students for teaching the basics about structural racism, right? And that now is a fireable offense. We have to look at books like uh Fahrenheit 451,
Oh yeah, we
to understand,
book
right?
club here. Well, last year, yeah.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I mean, you got to read that to understand. And that seems like, oh, that's science fiction. That's some wild tale. But there was a politician in Missouri just a couple weeks ago who took out a flamethrower and did a demonstration online of the flamethrower's power in front of a huge crowd, burning up a whole bunch of cardboard boxes. And then the other politician was watching that event, State Senator Bill Egal, and he said that he would turn that demonstration into a reality if they didn't get rid of all the books that needed to be burned. And he would do it right there. He said he would, on the lawn outside the governor's mansion, he would burn the books using the flamethrower, right?
Wow.
Just something straight out of Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah, Fahrenheit 451 is not a dystopian reality that we just read about. Like, we can witness it. I've seen, like, I live in Duval County and Jacksonville, Florida, and I'm lucky that I do get the banned books from the library. And so I can, even though they're banned, our librarians are still providing them. I have to wait for them, but they're still providing them. And so I'm very grateful for that. But 1984 is not just some phantasmagorical dystopian novel that George Orwell came up with. And as weird as it is, I was born in 1984. So I'm like, yeah,
Yep.
this like did real deal Holyfield. And so I've got my hardcover over here on my bookshelf. But I did want to talk about like you being in the classroom. And so how are you able to talk about the Red Scare or the Lavender Scare in your classroom? I mean, granted, you live in a very progressive place, but how are you able to do that and your administrators support you?
Yeah. So right now I'm not in the classroom because of my long COVID is making it too hard to be in the classroom, but I'm working with educators all over the country, in my hometown and all over the country. I'm helping to lead the Teaching for Black Lives study groups. And we have a book that I co-edited with Diane Watson and Wayne Now, Teaching for Black Lives. And it's been incredible to see. We have like over 120 study groups this year, and we're talking about 10 to 20 educators in these study groups. So we're talking about thousands of educators all across the country who are meeting in small groups, reading every chapter, coming together, discussing, figuring out how to implement, how to center Blackness in their classrooms, how to dismantle racist discipline policies in the schools. And some, I've got to work with educators, some in places where it's easier to do this work, and somewhere where it's incredibly difficult to do this work. And I've just been blown away at the courage of these educators who, like me, feel that it's wrong to lie to kids, and that we're not going to lie about our family's history of being enslaved or exploited. And so, some people have had the benefit of having a principal that supported them, like I did while I was in the classroom. I was able to help found the ethnic studies department at my high school, at Garfield High School, and really bring a whole anti-racist perspective to American history. And in some places, people have to engage in fugitive pedagogy, like the book Fugitive Pedagogy. Is an incredible analysis of the history of Black educators having to sneak the truth into classrooms, from Carter G. Woodson onward, finding ways. He founded Black History Week, which got hundreds of educators all over the country teaching Black history in a collective way so that they could support each other if they were attacked. And then that became Black History Month, right? When the 60s student movement popped off. And, that's the legacy that we want to draw on, because it is hard to do this work when you're by yourself. But if you can come together in the study groups or in Black Lives Matter at Schools Week of Action during the first week of February, or the Teach Truth Days of Action, then you're with hundreds and thousands of other people around the country that support you. And I think that's really the key to being able to do this work, is doing it collectively.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for all that you're doing with the study groups. And I definitely get the emails. And I always just think that, oh, well, I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. Can I join the study groups? And so I wonder from you, can I join the study groups even though I don't teach in a school?
Yeah. It's definitely worth checking out the Zinn Education Project's website and seeing the Teaching for Black Lives campaign. And you click on that, and we're all educators in some way. Maybe you're going to educate your neighborhood, your workplace, your community. Maybe you're going to educate other people in red, wine, and blue, right? So if there's a way for you to pass this on, and there's a group that you're working with that wants to come together and go through the book, then I would say go for it.
Yeah, because I definitely have your book on my bookshelf, and shout out to Deborah for sending it to me when we first met.
Oh, good.
I got it. Shout out to Deborah Minkar, who I think is also on the call. I would just, my last question before we open it up, and then Julie Collins can give us some questions from the chat. But what would be your lasting remarks about, like, how can we teach our children, not even our children, but even adults, about the truth about Black history and U.S. history? What would be your last thoughts about that before we take questions from the chat?
Yeah, well, I would start by saying that um, it's a total lie what the right is saying, that anti-racist teaching is about shaming white kids, right? That is their main talking point, that all of us social justice educators got into this work uh, to low wage, long hour work because we want to shame white kids. And it's just so absurd, right? In fact, we want to empower white kids with the understanding of what multiracial, anti-racist movements have looked like all throughout history. And we want to show them that they can be part of struggles to transform their country. And, I think it's actually those who deny structural racism who are shaming white kids, because white kids know that racism is real. They see it all over the place. They're in segregated schools, right? They're in segregated classrooms. They have, if they have friends who are people of color, they've heard stories about their peers being followed around in stores by security, or their families being harassed by police. They've heard these stories about how racism works. And if you don't teach them about structural racism, if you don't teach white kids that racism can be part of structures and institutions, even sometimes regardless of the intentions of the people that run those institutions, then a lot of times the white kids internalize that that all the problems with race are their fault, right? And I want them to actually develop a structural analysis of how inequality and racism can be woven throughout our institutions and be passed down generation after generation, even when better people come into those institutions. How does that work? How does that function? I think it's worth that kind of investigation. And I want my white students to learn about people like the Grimke sisters, who were abolitionists and fought to end slavery, white sisters, right? I want them to learn about John Brown, who organized and fought to end slavery, or to learn about Howard Zinn, who was a white professor who at Spelman, who joined with his black women students in struggles in the civil rights movement, right? I want them to learn the stories of white people who joined in the struggles for racial justice. And that's what they really fear. That's what the right wing really fear. They know we're not actually shaming white kids. We know we're saying you can be part of the struggle. You can be as great as these other leaders who joined in the movement. And that's what they don't want us to teach, because that would restructure society and make it more equitable. And it would require some to give up power and privilege that they don't want to do. And so we're going to keep teaching the truth, that it's always been a struggle that's made our country better, and that it's going to take a new one today.
Well, Jesse, you've been over here giving us that good word, and I'm kick it over to my colleague Julie Collins to ask some questions from the chat. And I'm gonna take myself off of spotlight and spotlight you and her. But I know Julie's got some juiciness out of the chat, and she already always comes with her own stuff too. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and lead, Julie.
All right. So first of all, someone asked, what was the name of your book again?
Yeah, so we were talking about Teaching for Black Lives. That is a great manual for anti-racist educators. We have a section on teaching Blackness intersectionally. So you can learn, to teach for Black lives means you have to teach about Black Latinx folks and Black Muslims and Black LGBTQ. So we have really an intersectional approach. We have a Black history approach, like engaging interactive lessons to help students not just get lectures about Black history, but engage in the key debates about the past. So I think it's good for not just educators, but anyone that wants to learn this history.
Okay.
And then I'm working on a book.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, sorry. I'm working on a book called Teach Truth, about the attack on anti-racist education and our struggle to defend it.
Okay. So you had named some resources when you were, just a little bit ago when you were explaining some things. Would you be able to give that information to Julie so that she can send it out in the email that she sends at the follow-up email, and then everybody will get it, if that's okay? So there were a couple of questions that were similar, but before we get to those, I'm going to ask, someone asked, how do you feel, or what do you think about the Black churches in Florida teaching Black history? And I kind of smiled when I saw saw that, because I remember I grew up in the 70s, and I remember that Black churches even then were expounding on the lack of Black history that we got in school even then, because we really didn't get any at that moment.
Yeah.
you know so this is really kind of a throwback to what has always been, in my opinion. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So I missed one word at the very beginning. What did I think about the Black?
Oh, the Black churches in Florida.
Churches.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, teaching Black history.
Teaching Black history. Well, it's needed, because the schools are, unfortunately, as you said, aren't doing it. And that's the irony when they say that critical race theory has inundated the schools, and most kids aren't learning the basics about Black history, and they never have, because that history reveals so much of what needs to change in this country. The Zinn Education Project just put out a report on Reconstruction. I guess it's been a while now, but several months ago put out a report about how Reconstruction is taught in this country. And it reveals everything you need to know about the fact that there is a massive lack of education of Black history, because this is an incredible era right after the Civil War, when you had more Black people being elected to office out of this in the South, to Congress, right? Then were elected up until like the 80s or in the 1980s. In the 1860s and 70s, we were electing Black officials. You had integrated schools in places like New Orleans in the 1860s, right? You had mass multiracial organizations and unions. There was an incredible advancement for racial justice that was cut short, and the rise of the KKK and the support by the government of the terrorist organizations like the KKK really helped to unwind that progress. And unfortunately, very few states have standards that ask students to look critically at that history. And if churches are going to teach that history, excellent. Where there's freedom school programs that are starting around the country more and more. Black Lives Matter at School hosted one this summer. Wherever we can supplement, and we have to continue to fight to change the public school curriculum to make it more accurately reflect our history.
So then these next two questions, I think, are really kind of very similar. And one is, what can we do to support the teachers? And then another person said, and what can we do to support the librarians? Because in many places, both are fearful of losing their jobs if they step out of this line that has now been drawn.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. Yeah, and my heart goes out to the librarians. They are under attack. There was a librarian in Missouri who had the police called on her, and the police came and investigated her twice because she had books, anti-racist and pro-LGBTQ plus books, right? That they want to label, as harmful to kids and say this is child abuse. And so they are terrorizing librarians. And in some instances, these people are too lazy to even read books anymore and find out which ones they want to ban. So they want to just close libraries altogether. There was a library in Michigan that they voted to defund, and it's only open because of private donations now. And in my home state of Washington, they got a ballot initiative going to close a library as well. And thankfully, a judge just blocked that. But not even in the McCarthy era, where the height of this hysteria of blacklists and all of the rest of it, they didn't close whole libraries. They did ban books. They banned Robin Hood. They banned the book Robin Hood in the state of Indiana because it was about redistributing wealth, right? I mean, this is the absurdity that they're doing. But librarians have always been dangerous to those who want to lie to kids. And so they've attacked both librarians and teachers. And I think some of the most important things to do are visible demonstrations of support that will encourage teachers. And, you know, there's efforts like bills passed in California that against banning books, right? So agitating for those kind of bills, to go on record in your school district, go to your school board and demand that we pass a resolution against banning books, against banning anti-racist curriculum, not waiting until that resolution to ban comes and then fighting it, but being proactive. I think will go a long way towards thawing the chilling effect that's happening on educators who are worried about what could happen if they teach the truth about the U.S. History. So definitely getting involved at the local level, at the school board. You can run for school board yourself. You can get on the list of speakers and ask that they pass a bill against book banning. Would be, I think, a really important place to start. And then hoping to organize on the Teach Truth Days of Action. You know, whether it's Black Lives Matter at School Week is a great way, or in June, the Teach Truth Day of Action, finding a historic site in your community and organizing an event to invite people to it, to talk about if these anti-truth bills pass in our district or in our city, we wouldn't be able to teach about this place in our community, and making it very concrete and real for people.
And then thank you again so much for coming, and I'll kick it back to Ray to close us up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And something you touched on that I think that's really significant is that we do need to encourage our legislators to promote policies against the banning of books. I know Illinois in particular, State Senator Mike Simmons, who's a dear friend of mine, introduced that legislation in Illinois to stop the banning of books, and that passed. And so Illinois is a place where they like you can't ban books there. Like they're like, we're open to all books for anybody. And so I appreciate State Senator Mike Simmons' leadership, and he's near and dear to me, and propose that legislation. But you've given us a lot of information to consider this past hour and forevermore. And I'm glad that you're even writing another book. And so you're full-time in author mode. And so let us know where to reach you and to find out what you're doing more.
Oh, right on. Yeah, folks can get me on Twitter, Jesse D. Hagopian. On my website is IamAnEducator.com. Yeah, and I'd be happy to connect with people in those ways.
Wow, your website is IamAnEducator.com. Like, how cool is that? I don't know if anybody has another better domain name besides that, but we are so glad you are all tuning in, and it's been real, everyone in the Red, Wine, and Blue community. Definitely reach out to us. You can find us on all the socials and at redwine.blue, and we'll see y'all next time.